Session 5 of the book of Genesis, the third day. And there's a lot to cover today. Last time, our second day session was a little short because it was just 3 verses. Today we have from verse 9 to verse 13. And it's also the first time, as we'll see in a moment, where God is said to do 2 different things on the same day. So let's take a quick look at the chart that we've been using to look at the structure of the whole thing. And so here we see the third day, and we'll see the dry land makes an appearance and vegetation makes an appearance. So 2 separate things, and we'll see that corresponds to the 6th day. Again, as the first day corresponds to the 4th, and second to the 5th, the third corresponds to the 6th, and again 2 things are made that day, the cattle and other land animals, and then the humans. So it's the only 2 days that we'll see 2 things made here. And in a way, nothing is going to be made on this day, but we'll get to that in a second. Then we'll also see a new thing introduced, and we'll see it a couple more times, this division of things according to their kind. So the light was unique, and the dome was unique, and so there were no different kinds. But now we're going to get differentiation down into the granular, so to speak, of vegetation of different kinds. So we'll look at that in just a moment. Let's take a close look here at some of the language, because the language here in the Hebrew reveals so many things that we can't possibly see in the English. It's part of the poetry and the beauty of the connections of things too. So we'll just go through it one verse at a time. So here we have, and God said, let the waters under the sky. So this is continuing from the second day, that the waters above the sky, above the dome rather, have been separated from the waters under the dome. So now the waters under the sky are gathered into one place. But we see in the New Revised Standard here, there's gathered in verse 9, there's gathered in verse 10, and that's very misleading because they're not the same word in Hebrew. So let's look a little more closely. So literally here, let the waters under the sky be in a place. We'll see much later in Genesis the Hebrew word makom for place is a very important word, and we'll see, for example, in Jacob's dream of the so-called Jacob's ladder, he'll say God was in this makom and I didn't know it. So that'll be something important to look at here. So what we're being told now is simply the waters are being put in a place, and as a result, again, we'll look at this one verse at a time. Let. This is not the same verb as let before, and we'll put that together in a second. As Walter Brueggemann notes here, it's best described, rendered with purposeful force, hence so that rather than and let. So that, so it's causal here. So once the waters are in a place, the dry land appears. It's not made, the earth already existed, it's just appearing. So in many ways these are revelations, or as the Earth Bible writer says, a geophany. Not a theophany, but a geophany, a revelation of the earth. And what's being revealed is specifically dry land, Yabashah here, and it's important to see that that's not the same as earth, Eretz, as we'll see in a moment when God called the Yabashah Eretz. Nor is it soil, it's the distinction of dry land from wet land. And note the parallel here in Exodus. So here in Exodus 4, when Moses is being tried to be persuaded by God to go back to Pharaoh, he will be told, you'll take some of the water of the Nile and pour it on the dry ground. And of course that will echo into this story where the sea is divided so the Israelites can walk on dry ground. So the idea of the Yabashah here is ground that's dry. It's not its fertility, and it's not its nature as land, it's its nature as not wet. And so as we see, it appears, or was seen. It wasn't created, it appears. Again, the sense of a geophany. Or as Brueggemann also says here, according to the Septuagint, theto, the earth is not commanded to come into being, as in the verb egeneto. Indeed, the thought behind the creation of the land in verse 9 is that it makes its appearance by being uncovered. So it's a discovering of the land. And then God calls the dry land Eretz, and we'll see how Eretz is one of the key words for the land. So, for example, Eretz Yisrael is the land of Israel, as opposed to, as we'll see in the garden story, Adamah, which is the part of the land from which the human material is made. So this is Eretz. So the dry land is Eretz, and of course that will mean that things can live on it as opposed to live in it, although things will live in the earth as well, as we'll see, and in fact under the earth, as the holistic description of life in the biblical narrative is of creation above the earth in the sky, in the air, on the earth, and under the earth. So now here the waters are gathered, but literally not that either. They're literally pooled. And there are a number of verb-noun word plays here that we're going to look at. So the verb here is from the noun mikvah, which to this day is a Jewish ritual pool. If you were to go to Jerusalem or Israel today, you see many ancient mikvot, the ritual pools that people went in for ritual bathing and other things. So the pooled waters, the waters that were already contained as opposed to, say, rivers, he called yamim. Which is also a play on, if not the Enuma Elish, on the Canaanite cosmological myths, that the Yam is the embodiment of sea as something dangerous. So no Tiamat here, no sea monster, and no threat to God. And God sees it as good. So this good here is collecting both what we just saw now and in the previous one, because the last "and God saw that was good" was with the light back here. I take it back. There is no good there. This is the time we see that it's good. I take that back. I stand corrected here. So this is summarizing all since verse 4, that all this that's happening is good. And then we have the second aspect of God's creation here. So now there's dry land that's revealed by the water being raised off the land so land can be revealed. Now the earth will reveal what's in it. And we have to look really closely to see what's going on here. So let's look at it one little thing at a time. A couple overall things here. These are notes from scholars that, including Klaus Westermann here, a little bit older style of scholarship from the German, but he says here importantly, it's very clear that the parallel ancient stories of Sumerian and African parallels are not interested in the origins of plants, but only of edible plants. The description in Genesis is on its way to a scientific explanation of the origins of plants. An objective interest has taken the place of a purely functional interest. And we'll see a number of ways that that's being described here, that it's not just what things can do for humans, although we'll see later that the fruit trees are made for humans to eat, but right now they just exist for their own purpose. So this phrase from the New Revised Standard, "let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seeds, and fruit trees of every kind," misses so much. So let's look a little more closely at this phrase. So this phrase in Hebrew, "Tachi ha'eretz deshev esev," literally, "let green the earth green forth." Let green the earth green forth. And in the little video that I'm going to play in the foreground here, that you can see of this seed growing forth from the ground, underground, illustrating something of what this text is suggesting here. That secretly, by itself, the earth is acting to bring forth these plants out of itself, out of the earth. And yet there's more. So that's this phrase, "let the earth put forth vegetation." But then this phrase, "plants yielding seeds," "esev mazri azera," is really plants seeding seeds. So as the green is greening forth, the plants are seeding forth, and fruit trees of every kind. So you know what Genesis is telling us about this cycle that runs on its own, that the seeds are in the earth brings forth plants that have fruit, and the fruit has seeds in them. So the seeds that were in the earth to bring forth the plants now come forth with the plants to bring forth more seeds when they drop into the earth. And of course that will be a theme in the Gospel of John in chapter 12, where Jesus speaks about a seed falling to the ground and dying, unless it bears fruit by dying. And we'll see that in another series way later in this Radical Bible program. So the green is greening forth, the seeds are seeding forth, and fruit trees of every kind. And notice in the New Revised Standard catches something from the Hebrew here that's that the rabbinical commentators, both the Genesis Rabbah and Rashi, note. Fruit trees here, and then every kind of tree bearing fruit, which is to say, the initial impression here is that the trees themselves are to be fruit. That you could eat the trees and not just the fruit from the trees. And so you get Rashi here suggesting that the earth has sinned by being disobedient in that playful way they do. So I'll read his quote for a moment here. "Thus, this implies that the taste of the tree should be the same as the taste of the fruit. However, the earth did not do this, but rather the earth sprouted forth a tree producing a fruit. But the tree itself was not a fruit. Therefore, when Adam was cursed for his sin, the earth too was punished for its sin and was also cursed," which is explaining why in chapter 3, the earth, which has seemed to have done nothing wrong in that story, is cursed along with the snake and the man and the woman. So here, expressing that the earth was disobedient. It's a word play, and probably the original authors didn't mean to suggest the earth was being sinful, but it's one of those things that the rabbis do that we'll look at that as we go. So fruit trees of every kind here, in the Greek genos or genus, hence the later scientific category of genus and species. Fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with the seed in it. So emphasizing that point that that there's this cycle. Here, though, it's the verb for making, what God was doing earlier for making. And so this is the first time that a non-God actor makes something happen. The earth is making this happen. The earth is an entity. And although the earth is never described as a conscious entity, and it's certainly not a divinity, as it would have been in many other ancient cultural contexts, it certainly leaves open the idea of what in the modern world is the Gaia hypothesis, the idea that the earth is a living being, just like the beings on it are living beings. And although we can probably not answer that question in a factual or even a scientifically theoretical way, other than to observe that the earth, like humans, produces life and reproduces on its own within itself. It doesn't obviously produce more planets, but it produces mountains and plants and rivers, etc., that it could be a living being. And because it responds to God's command, it's given the sense of its listening. It leaves open the possibility for what we might call a deep ecological approach to this story and to life. Because here we see the earth does it. The earth brought forth. The earth, as an actor here, is bringing forth vegetation. Literally, the verb watatsi means let something which is within come out. So highlighting that sense you see from the video of the seed that's already in the ground coming forth. Plants yielding seed of every kind, and trees of every kind bearing fruit with a seed in it. The verb for the noun rather for plants here, both here and there, is suggesting fodder for animals, like the food for the cattle. So just as there's fruit trees here, when the cattle are being created, the land animals, as vegetarian on day 6, there's already food for them to eat. This will be different from what we'll see as plants of the field, which will be described in chapter 2 in the Garden of Eden story, which suggest cultivation, intentionally planting things by humans, as opposed to the earth bringing forth itself. And God saw that it was good. And there's the evening, morning, the third day. So by the end of the third day, we have the self-replicating system of life. That there's water and there's dry land, and the dry land can bring forth seeds and fruit and trees and green, and it's wet and it's green and it's lively. And the only question next is, who's it for? What's going to be there? But that little suspenseful question will be delayed until day 6, because we have to go back to the parallel with day 1 to the sky. So see you next time as we return to the sky.